Okay, let's get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the LSE. My name's Richard Davies. I'm a professor in the School of Public Policy here at the LSE. And as part of that, I run something called the Growth Lab. The aims of the Growth Lab are really to look across the world and to ask questions about where we can improve economic outcomes. And one of the most important examples of a place where we can potentially improve economic outcomes of recent times is, of course, Ukraine. So it's a real honor to be chairing this session tonight. I'm joined on my immediate left by Dezyk, on my far left by Anya Abdulakh. In the middle, we've got Ricardo Crescenzi. He's a colleague here at the LSE. I'll give a bit more of an intro to all of them when they make their remarks. But we're going to start off with my colleague Camila Arroyo, who's going to present some work that we've done here at the LSE. Just a few quick housekeeping points from me. Number one, phones. Please do make sure your phones are on silent. That is in part because of my second point, which is podcast. Everything has to be a podcast these days, and this event is not immune to that. So we will be recording it, and we hope putting it up on the LSE website if the sound quality is good enough. So please do keep your phones off. And there will be time for questions at the end, and I'll come to the audience at the end. So without further ado, let's start off with Camila, who's going to explain some of the work we've done here at the LSE.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Richard. I'm Camila Arroyo. I'm a policy officer at the Growth Lab LSE. And today I'm going to present the findings and the recommendation from the report, Ukraine Diaspora and Returnees Policy. This is part of the Growth Lab team and also from the Economics Observatory team. You have bookmarks that you can scan the QR code and you will see the things that we have done as a team. So the economic motivation of this report is the idea that for productivity, you need technology. And for technology, you need people, because know-how is in people's brain. So under this idea, under this framework, forced migrant and other type of migrants can act as a knowledge diffusion of knowledge diffuser. So the idea is that there's kind of new literature review on two different brands of economic knowledge diffusion. One of them is that returnees can help to develop the economic of the home countries. There are some evidence indicating that companies hiring people that came back from other countries can also increase their exports. And also the diaspora is a key agent in developing the country because they act as key agents for investment, for knowledge diffusion. So that's the motivation behind this. And we wanted to do a report on Ukraine because we know that there is a critical shortage of human capital in the country. So there is a need of two types of policies. This is a spoiler alert, but you need them both at the same time. We're going to see case studies in which countries that are facing high levels of immigration try to bring people back, but then they realize that they also need to engage the diaspora. So that's why we are going to do this. We did this policy report addressing two types of policies. One is to encourage the return of Ukrainians and also incentivize policies that can make use of their new skills that they have acquired abroad, the new networks, the new knowledge. At the same time, you need policies to engage the diaspora. So this is something that you should know, but the full-scale invasion not only affected the economy of Ukraine in the first year after the full-scale invasion, the GDP decreased by 30%, but also triggered a huge migratory wave. So today, up to date, there are approximately 6 million people that left Ukraine. 90% of them are in Europe, and there is another 4 million people that move internally. So together, they account for 1/5 of the population pre-full-scale invasion. So this is a huge migration wave. And most of them went to EU because of the temporary protection, which allows them to work, they have access to education, they have free movement there. But the UK is also the fourth country with highest number of Ukrainian refugees, with approximately 220,000 Ukrainians that have arrived in the UK since 2022. There are two types of the visa schemes, the family scheme and the House for Ukraine scheme. And there are other types of visa that allow them to extend their residence here. And what is relevant is that the refugees represent a specific subset of the Ukrainian population. First, they come from the regions, the oblasts that have been more affected by the war. Second, they are mostly women with children, and that's in other countries with refugees from Ukraine, but in the UK, the proportion of women is 64, is even higher. They are highly educated. 74% of Ukrainians that were surveyed and they are living abroad in other countries, they have tertiary education, and in the UK, 80% of Ukrainians that were surveyed indicated having a degree level. So they are highly educated. There are some studies that indicate that Ukrainians have are more qualified than other refugees in general, and than the Ukrainian population in general. So that's really relevant. And they also have an employment history. 70 of them indicated being working before the full-scale invasion. And when we compare that with the employment rate in Ukraine in 2021, it's over that. And in December 2024, 60% of them indicated being employed in their host countries. And in the UK, the proportion is higher, it's close to 70%. But of course, they are facing high level of mismatch because just 1/3 is working in the same sector they used to work in Ukraine. And of course, the wish to remain are increasing over time. Just one number that I would like to tell you to compare what had happened in the last 3 years is that since November 2022, the people that indicated that they were definitely coming back to Ukraine was 50%, and in December 2024 was 20%. So every year, this proportion is increasing, the people that wants to remain in their host countries. And in the UK, this is around 70%. So this is a policy, this is a really relevant topic for the UK. What we did in the report, and this is a very brief summary of the report because this is a very long case studies, analysis, and literature review. But what we did is that we analyzed all the literature review on returning for forced migrants. And we divided all the findings in 5 different pillars to understand the key actors, the drivers, and the lessons for Ukraine. The first one is under voluntary repatriation programs, the primary agent deciding to come back is the refugee. And there are key characteristics that are super important that we'll explain if they are coming to come back or not. But there are some studies in previous conflicts in the world that indicated that after 10 years, only 1/3 of refugees came back to their home countries. And the first 5 years are the key timing for returning policy. So that's super important. The second one is that refugees tend to come back to urban centers. Even if they used to live in the countryside, they tend to come back to the urban center. So this is important for urban planning and infrastructure provision. Third one, economic stability is key for sustainable reintegration. It's not just about infrastructure and housing program, it's about giving them the opportunity to work. Otherwise, they will move again, and this is related to one of the 6th pillar, but the comparison between the host country and the home country also is a key element to consider when coming back or not. And migration is a cycle. It's not just I come back to my country, then people migrate again. So this is really relevant for policy on returning for Ukrainians. The fourth one is that family is super important. They act as information, they give information, they receive refugees when they come back to their countries. They are not usually, the funds or programs are not focused on families of the refugees. And we think that is super relevant because they are the ones that are going to receive them. So family is super relevant. And there is also something that is interesting is that people that want to come back to their home countries, they used to divide themselves as a community or as a family. They go there, they see what is happening, and then they come back. So for this, we think, and that's one of the things that we're going to recommend for the UK, is that you need like permissions to go, visit, look, and come back. That's super relevant for the decision for returning. And again, the conditions that are more important in deciding when deciding to return is security, of course, the first one, but then economic is the second one, and it's every time is more important. So it's not just about security, it's about economic and job opportunities. We also conducted 3 case studies that are super relevant for Ukraine. Why? Bosnia and Herzegovina, we chose it because it had a war in 1992 with 2 million people displaced. And there are some elements that are super relevant for Ukraine in this case. We also chose the Baltic countries, Estonia, Lithuania, and Latvia, because they are EU countries that are facing high level of immigration because of lack of opportunity. So for us, it's like, this is an example of when you try to bring people back to your country, but if you don't have job opportunities or economic stability, then people will migrate again. So, and Albania, we chose it because it's a country that has faced levels of remigration because people left Albania and and Albanians came back to Albania because of the economic crisis in the world, for example, in the global financial crisis. So these 3 examples are super relevant because they show, for me, they show 3 different things. First one, countries that are facing high levels of immigrations have shifted the diaspora and migration policies from bringing people back to engage the diaspora. So for us, this is super relevant for Ukraine. You need both. It's not just about bring talented people back to your country, it's also about engage the people that stayed abroad. The case of Bosnia is super relevant, I think, because I like to give the German case and not to replicate, because in the case of Bosnia, Germany was the only country that didn't allow Bosnia to stay in the country after the war ended. So in all the other countries in the EU, Bosnians stay over 80%. But in Germany, just 10% of them stay in Germany. And it's very well studied in the literature. It's not a good case on how the things were done in that moment. And the opposite is the Denmark and Sweden case, that they promoted this policy that was named Look and Visit, that is, go to your country. They funded trips to the country, and they allowed them to go, look, visit, and come back and decide if they wanted to come back or not. So this is an example that we are taking from the Bosnia case. And from Albania, the examples that we're taking are the diaspora engagement policies they are promoting, mainly focused on investment. So they have a lot of projects, and the same with the Baltics, in which the government is contacting the diaspora, and they have these plans in which they can invest in particular municipalities. So, and it had worked very well. So these are 3 examples that we think that are super relevant for Ukraine. So the policy recommendations. Yeah, the report is very long, but I will try to do it very quick. But the most important, or the big one, like the big umbrella in which our recommendations are set, is you need economic policies to promote productivity. Otherwise, from the case studies that we analyzed, in the midterm, if people don't have economic opportunities, they will migrate again, or they will not have the incentives to stay in the country. So if you want to create a sustainable return policy, you need economic development in the medium term. So that's super relevant. And then a migration strategy with dual approach. You need engage the diaspora, and you need to promote returning. It's not just about trying to bring people back, it's also about engaging the people that are going to stay abroad. And given the evidence, we know there is going to be a proportion of people that are going to stay in their home countries, and the other group are going to remain or will come back to Ukraine. So yeah, all our policies are around how to do these 2 approaches. And what is key is very relevant to change the perception of the diaspora. This is something that we had a lot of meetings for this report, and a lot of people commented this, like that the people that is abroad, it shouldn't be seen as a traitor, it's a collaborator, it's the Ukrainian diaspora is important. So this is really relevant to create a real diaspora engagement, from Ukraine. And also, we have some recommendations for the UK. We have had the opportunity to present this report to different government departments. And the things that we have told them and that we put in the report is that first, you need to understand the diaspora. Who is here? What are they doing? Are they working as a employees? Are they entrepreneurs? Are they working in multinationals that also have a brand in Ukraine? That kind of things is something that we think that is super relevant in UK to understand the Ukraine refugees. Second, support the IT sector. This is something that I didn't mention because of the lack of time, but the IT sector in Ukraine has grown a lot in the last years. And there is one initiative that we think that is important, that is the UK-Ukraine Tech Bridge. We think that is super relevant because the IT sector is a good example of how the UK can contribute to Ukraine through the development of a particular sector. The third one is enable flexible movement and return for long-term integration. And this is related to what we said about look and visit policies, visas that allow them to go to the country, visit, come back, and then decide if they want to stay. And the automatic visa extension, because today, to apply to the visa, you have to do it one by one. So we think that this would have helped them to have more certainty about the future, and also to know what is going to happen in the future. We don't know what is going to happen with the next extension of the visa, but of course, having a limited visa affect the capacity to have a rent or to find a long-term job. So yeah, those are the recommendations. And yeah, this is just what we do as Economic Observatory and the Growth Lab. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Camila. Okay, well, we're going to go over to our panel now to hear from them, but just two things to say. The first is that I saw quite a few people taking photos of the slides. You will be able to find the slides on our site, and the full report will make it really obvious if it's not obvious tonight, so it's there tomorrow. If you just go find the LSE website and then /growth, just the single word growth, GROWTH, that will take you to the Growth Lab. The second thing, even more importantly than that, is that people have been arriving. We're full now, which is great. But I think our youngest member of our audience, our most important LSE mind, just came in and doesn't actually have a seat. So could I ask one of the team there's a seat here with a bag on it. Could we take that bag off that seat and give it to the person that came in at the end? You're very welcome. Okay, so once we've got everybody seated, let's turn to our panel. And I'm going to turn first to Anna. Anna is chair of the association, deputy chair rather, the Association of Ukrainians in Great Britain. She's been instrumental in setting up the Ukrainian Welcome Centre, which provides essential support to Ukrainian refugees in the UK. So, Anna.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me, and it's really good to see a really full hall for this really emerging and important issue. I think the first time that I realised that maybe people in government didn't really understand the situation Ukrainians were in, escaping Russia's full-scale invasion, was when MP Kevin Foster, then Minister for Safe and Legal Migration, tweeted that there are a number of routes, not least our seasonal workers scheme, which Ukrainians can qualify for alongside the family route for those that are relatives here. This was a response to questions about how the UK would support Ukrainians fleeing the Russian invasion. And I probably rolled my eyes out loud at the implication that Ukrainians escaping war would consider fruit-picking jobs as a route to safety. Fortunately, a few weeks later, the government announced Homes for Ukraine, which has proved to be one of the most innovative and successful visa schemes providing sanctuary for refugees in recent years. That said, it very much highlighted the fact that people didn't understand that many Ukrainians coming to the UK were highly educated and skilled in many professional level careers. Let's consider the broader question first. Have Ukrainians adequately been supported under UK policy for refugees? On the surface, at a basic level, hygiene level, yes, the answer is likely yes. All visa categories grant access to public funds, healthcare, education, employment, and language learning. In general, Ukrainians have integrated well, and many are already making a valuable contribution to UK society, despite the recent uncertainty with visa extensions. Children have adapted well in the UK education system, but do not know whether they will be able to complete their studies. And for many, it's the only system they know. And as we see, the young girl that came in is actually one of those children. So from the diaspora perspective, what are the issues relating to return intentions and what potential policies need to be thought through, not just in the UK, but also in Ukraine? How can the time spent away from the home country be leveraged with new outlooks, skills, and education? Well, probably the first step in the journey is the issue of reconciling fragmented communities and the reconstruction of the social contract with their country. Many Ukrainians remained in Ukraine, but others fled, and many are now returning or may even be repatriated in future. These different groups will inevitably compete for resources, recognition, and influence in rebuilding efforts. Without mechanisms to foster cohesion, there's a real risk of entrenching social divisions. Should the UK provide financial support or travel assistance to returning Ukrainians, as was provided for Bosnian refugees after the Dayton Accords in the 90s? Or will this cause more divisions? Support doesn't necessarily need to be financial, but establishing inclusive planning forums that engage both returnees and residents would be a good start. And this includes not only returnees, but veterans who need special care and support for reintegration into civilian life. Policies around reconciliation that acknowledge these diverse experiences of displacement may be necessary. Return intentions are also related to the economic situation in Ukraine. Will I get a good job? Will I build a good life when I return? We've yet to understand the impact of the so-called unity hubs proposed by ministers in Ukraine. By ministers in Ukraine will the impact that they will have, but they're intended to help inform Ukrainians abroad about opportunities in Ukraine, from government programs through to job vacancies. Next, policies for building skills and capacity for local recovery. This is where the learnings and experiences of those who have been employed here and have learnt different soft skills and less rigid practices comes in. Reconstruction will not be driven solely by national institutions. Local actors, municipalities, civil society organisations and community leaders must be equipped to lead. It is likely there will be a pressing need for more skilled professionals, project managers, planners, and technical experts capable of implementing recovery initiatives at scale. Support could focus on flexible delivery models through microgrants, diaspora skill recognition schemes, or development of training hubs. There have been projects developed here for upskilling. Some big employers have tried to employ and train Ukrainians in volume, for example, Amazon and Pret-a-Manger. But many Ukrainians have been very underemployed. We all know vets who work as dog groomers, doctors working in care homes, and so on. So where is the sweet spot between the needs of a company for employee career progression and the investment in Ukrainians who may eventually leave the country? Well, in 2023, in Scotland, NatWest Group, in partnership with Code First Girls, Capital City and Government, and actually with the help of AUGB Edinburgh, set up an employment programme to reskill 60 Ukrainian women into becoming software engineers. The programme also addressed the gender imbalance in Scotland's tech sector, where women held only 23% of digital roles. The excellent World Jewish Relief Step Ukraine programme has supported Ukrainians to become more independent through English language and employment upskilling. The intervention was designed in response to an ONS survey that said 40% had experienced difficulties taking up work in the UK, and 52% of those reported not meeting the required English language skills as the reason that they could not get employment. So finally, issues around education and youth engagement. Very many children have experienced only the UK educational system, while large numbers of teenagers are on the verge of making decisions about higher education. We've recently found out that young Ukrainians are unlikely to be able to access the university apprenticeship pathway, as the short-term nature of the UPE extensions may not correlate with the length of their courses. And we're actually currently writing lots of letters to government about this specific apprenticeship pathway. This not only shuts down opportunities, but also puts a brake on the contribution that they could make. The policy on the apprenticeship pathway should therefore be reconsidered. The longer Ukrainian children stay here, the quicker they will assimilate. Maintaining connection to Ukrainian language and heritage is important and can be achieved through additional funding of Ukrainian language supplementary schemes. There are around 40 Ukrainian supplementary schools in Britain operating under AUGB, Ukrainian St. Mary's Trust and others. These not only provide benefits for children, such as trauma-informed activities, but allow Ukrainian school teachers to learn about UK safeguarding school policies and training opportunities that can be adapted in the Ukrainian system. There is also strong support for reintroducing Ukrainian GCSE, and Ukrainian St. Mary's Trust have devoted considerable resources to making the case for a full-time mainstream school, which would create a permanent education and trauma recovery hub. In the light of the 100-year UK-Ukraine Partnership Agreement, which envisages increasing opportunities for young Ukrainians, particularly girls, women in the UK, through participation in youth programmes, these initiatives would provide a very practical way of doing so. It would not only increase access to trauma recovery, but would also support Ukrainian curriculum studies, allowing young Ukrainians the option of pursuing further studies and employment opportunities in Ukraine. The only thing that we are looking for is funding for that. I would like to end with a quote from a student that I actually interviewed for a report I've just written for the Greater London Authority. And it very much highlights the uncertainty in refugees' lives. So he said, "It's not clear if I will live in Ukraine or in Britain my whole life. I cannot say now. Employment, citizenship is unknown. I may go to Poland to work. How do youth want to build their future? I don't think it's a clear future because it's a difficult situation." Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Anna. That was a particularly moving quote at the end there, somebody living under such uncertainty. We're now going to change gears slightly. Ricardo will talk next. Ricardo is a professor of economic geography here at the LSE. He's a leading expert on regional economic development, foreign direct investment. He's advised the European Commission, the OECD, the World Bank, So he's just the person to tell us how the UK can help and how cross-border investment can help to rebuild and to improve Ukraine.
Thank you, Richard. Yeah, I really enjoyed reading the report. It's a fantastic piece of work and looks at the issue of the diaspora in a very interesting and also policy-oriented and constructive manner. I would like to take the angle of foreign investment when looking and assessing how diaspora linkages can be leveraged. And the first observation that I think is interesting to make is that you learn a lot when you zoom into individual countries. So when you go beyond the national level and you look at the geography of the diaspora at the more fine-grained level, and you see where the different settlements, where different groups have settled within countries. That's true. This is a story about urban centers. That's about cities that attract inevitably the diasporas of all types, but it's also true about secondary cities. That's about rural areas in Europe. This is about a diversity of geographies of the diaspora. And why am I saying this? Because we did a similar exercise when looking at foreign investment, when we try to see, okay, where are foreign investment from Ukraine going to in Europe? And we were trying to build we wrote a short chapter trying to highlight how important Ukraine is and was for the process of European integration, and trying to show that the multiplicity of countries and the multiplicity of regions within those European countries were connected with Ukraine, and somewhat their fate was linked to Ukraine and to the future of Ukraine. The point that we wanted to make is that the link is not only about border regions. Not very often when you think about, for example, the enlargement of the European Union, or the previous enlargements, the idea was mostly we need to support border regions because these are the ones that are affected by the enlargement. And similarly, thinking, okay, border regions, the regions physically bordering Ukraine are the ones that have something at stake when thinking about Ukraine and in its future. But when you look at these non-spatial networks that connect Ukraine with the rest of Europe, you find a complex geography, a complex network that is shaped by diaspora networks as well as investment networks that involve a multiplicity of places around Europe and create a diversified set of connections. And when looking at the FDI part of that, the interesting insight was that many less developed regions in Europe, the ones that are supported, for example, by the EU structural funds, so southern Italy, for example, the south of Spain, parts of Greece, were involved in the FDI networks from and to Ukraine. So this shows that these links involve not only the usual suspects of capital flowing from capital cities to capital cities, but a wider set of actors that were receiving investment and sending investment through from and to Ukraine. And I think the issue there, when we wrote this short chapter a couple of years ago, was mostly measured by the disruption that was involved by the interruption, some key critical supply chains from Ukraine. We are looking at the case of rapeseed oil, for example, and a variety of products were affected in the pharmaceutical industry, for example, cosmetics, et cetera, et cetera. So a wide diversity of European industries affected, but also neon, critical raw material, critical for the chip industries, microprocessors, for example, significantly affected. So this shows the connection, that the connection between Europe and Ukraine is much wider and has a very diversified geography, the first point. This, that involves also the places that Europe is trying to bring back to the center, the periphery of Europe. So that's a sort of intra-periphery connectivity that is very important for economic development and for more cohesive economic development, not only in Ukraine, but also in the EU. So how are diaspora and FDI connected? I think the report spells this out very clearly. Migrants create investment opportunities. They can work, and there is very nice work. There was a recent PhD here at the LSE student that submitted a thesis exploring how migration connections can deal with uncertainty when making investment decisions, and how important, in this case, where connection at the board level have been in navigating, for example, the uncertainty following Brexit. So here, like, shows the potential that diaspora linkages have in driving investment, not only from Europe and the UK towards Ukraine, having foreign investment as a leverage for economic development in Ukraine, but also the other way around, in order to recreate the network of extra Ukraine connection that are needed for many industries to develop through FDI towards Europe. So there is a two-way connectivity that diaspora connections can enable. And this offers opportunities that's very important to think about, to characterize FDI and investment not only as a capital investment, but also as something that moves skills. So when foreign firms invest, they also bring the people with the skills that are needed to make things happen on the ground. And they also bring the know-how, to use a little bit Ricardo Sausman language, or to bring the knowledge, the competencies, the technologies that are needed for economic development, for economic upgrading. So when diaspora connections can leverage FDI, can mobilize FDI as a form of two-way connectivity between Ukraine and Europe, Ukraine and the UK, there are opportunities on both ends. And this is
Ricardo, just as chair, let me come in there, because there's probably at least one person in the room, if not a few, that don't know exactly what FDI is and why we think it might be different to kind of regular investment. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but a general equity investment, let's say, you could just buy a few shares in Apple or Google or whoever you want to invest in. But when you do FDI, you're taking quite a big stake in a company, typically more than 25%, or it could be defined as FDI if you're actually building things, you're kind of engaged kind of on the ground. And so as economists, we think that FDI, as opposed to other types of investment, it means quite a kind of physical commitment to that place.
It's an enduring interest so that there is something not necessarily like about the size or necessarily about the share, but that's about the interest. So it's not a portfolio investment where I am interested in my short-term returns, but I have an enduring interest in what I'm going to do in the host economy. So that's how like FDI can be seen as an important conduit, bringing capital to Ukraine and to different regions, to different areas within the country. So also where different investments are going generates like very different geographies and very different types of opportunities. And in turn, like this type of investment generate trade flows to and from the country. So here, like the story is really the two things are connected. Diaspora can be leveraged because it makes it possible to navigate uncertainty when making this type of like long-term investment, this type of long-term commitments. But I think what is important, and it is like somewhat like in the undertext in the report, that's important to set the opportunities also for the UK, the opportunities also for Europe. So that's not only about bringing capital, bringing knowledge to Ukraine, but also through the development of these two-way linkages that can be enabled by diaspora linkages, there are new opportunities, investment opportunities, but also knowledge exchange opportunities that are two-way, also for the UK, in particular when you think about specific regions and specific areas within the UK or in Europe. And I think that's an interesting like selling point to say, okay, when you are asked by policymakers, what is it that is in there for me? What can I gain from it? It's not something that you do for purely altruistic motives. There is something that you can like gain from this relationship. So opportunities for less developed regions, opportunities for upgrading in FDI. So that's not only about the quantity of investment, also the type of investment that is enabled by different type of diaspora networks. And this becomes particularly important not only in the UK, but also in Europe in the new context of strategic autonomy, where the EU really wants to develop more resilient and more reliable supply chains and extra EU connections. Ukraine can present itself as an important partner in this regard in terms of like friendshoring pathways. A final point, like what type of policies can make this possible to use and to leverage diaspora as a way to attract capital, knowledge, and skills? Well, a lot depends on the timeline, on the time scale. What you were discussing about how migrants then are assimilated into their context and it becomes more difficult to convince them or for them to make further mobility choices. So the time frame is very important, and of course also the geography of the reconstruction is very important. But I think that's very important to highlight the question for whom. So who's going to benefit from this type of policies? And we can think about policies that also work for the UK, that generate like opportunities for the UK. And it's very important, the shift that is well highlighted in the report, going from brain gain, from circulation. So we want to create platforms for the circulation of knowledge. And this like resounded a lot with policies that have been attempted in countries like including Italy, for example, where you had historically migration for southern Italy, for example, and there was a lot of attempts to do brain gain. We want to regain our talent, but it's really like there is an in-depth understanding that the only way to regain talent is through circulation, to allow the circulation, and this involves how you deal with pensions, how you deal with the tax system. So it involves a wide set of reforms and devices that need to be set in place to make this circulation possible beyond the narrow realm of migration policies. And finally, like the policies for Ukraine, really like leveraging diaspora as a key source of FDI, but also as a source for upgrading in terms of like moving away from connections, from investment only in traditional sector, more basic activities, but to use like these high-skilled people that are becoming part of the productive and strategic leadership of companies in Europe and in the UK to push for an upgrading, for more sophisticated investment, doing more in Ukraine and more sophisticated activities that are the ones that have the highest potential to generate spillovers, to generate a local multiplier, to generate effect in the wider host economy, including impacting domestic firms. I'll stop here.
Thank you very much, Ricardo. And finally, we're going to hear from Anya. Now, Anya is taking an executive master's here at the LSE, but she also does loads of other things, importantly, working to integrate Ukrainian refugees by working closely with London boroughs. She's also a director at Ardwick Partners, which is an advisory firm, and a member of the Human Rights Watch London Committee, where she focuses on advocacy related to Ukraine. So over to you, Anya.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I do have slides, which I'm not going to use much because of the time. But so as kind of highlight, so I'm come to this conversation from the practical point of view. And I want to highlight a few things. One is to remind everyone that the war is not over. And actually things getting back home worse, not better. So where we are today, it's not clear how situation is going to change. So the statistics, you know, but we have about maybe 200 drones, 20, 30 missiles attacks every single day. So there was a sudden escalation on the attack of civilian infrastructure over the last several months. So where we are today in Ukraine, it's not clear how much worse it's going to get before we have to decide what we need to do. Just to give a bit of the idea of the numbers, that Ukraine, after the start of the war, had lost 25% of its workforce. This is staggering. 1/4 of the labor force disappeared through different factors. There is, you know, refugees leaving the country, women pulling out of the workforce because they have to care after their children. There is internal displacement. There is the obviously, unfortunately, very high level of the civilian and even high of the military death roll. So you have these things happening that the question estimates of the experts, they're saying they're going to be around from 4 to 6 million people needed for reconstruction to work. So when we look at these numbers, obviously Ukrainian government facing various options and there are not single solution, right? So the question is how we actually retrain the veterans who are coming back after the war, how we work with internally displaced people, how we work with women, helping them to gain back their into labor by working about the childcare arrangement. The labor regulation have to change. And obviously we do come back to the question about refugees in diaspora. And diaspora estimate is about 10 million people worldwide. And refugee is, after the war, it's about 6.8, 6.9 million. You see by the countries, as also Camila was mentioning, that, I mean, if you take away Russia, majority of them are in Europe, and UK is number 4 as a host, and more recent numbers about 267,000 Ukrainians in UK. And again, we pretty much know who are these people. And not surprisingly, 65% of them are women, because men are not allowed to leave the country if you can serve in the army. But more importantly, almost 28%, almost 30% of these people are people under 18, which is a big important factor to consider when you think how you're going to work with these people, how you make them to come back. And also what we know, again, was Camila mentioned, that actually over 60, I think 69% now of these people are working in employment. So these people are capable of creating value, they're capable of working. Those who cannot work, that about 50% of the reasons because of the English language, and majority of these women who are working, 60% of the saying of adults of the service saying they want to stay in this country. So we also have to consider that this population there, what is their kind of incentive to come back? And there are various reports to look at what are the factors that make you want to come back. And there are kind of main 5 things that I want to mention is, one is obvious, what is your economic situation in the country you're living? One is what is the opportunity economically in the country you're going to come back to? There is the factor of the surrounding infrastructure like housing, child schooling, healthcare. There is one is also time, which is obviously who knows how long the war is going to continue. And as Camila report shows, the more war continues, the less likely you want to come back. And the 5th factor is very interesting because there is Natalia Zayka from Ukraine who just published academic report a few days ago back in Ukraine about the national identity is very important, also has a positive correlation. You have to feel Ukrainian that you want to come back. And also for the younger people especially, that's a big question mark. And I come back to it, but we have also in the audience Ina, who is heading this St. Mary Ukrainian School Trust. We teach us about over 3,000 Ukrainians by now, who is a very important part of this work. So we have to look at this, understand what we need to do. So from my point of view, practical side, what I see, we have to focus on making sure Ukrainians who are here live into their maximum potential economically, that they reach this productivity, that you don't know how long this war is going to continue. They don't want to be relying on the government support for the benefits. They want to be productive. And then when the time to come back, they can offer something to Ukraine. They can get a good job and they can relocate. And especially for young people, feel engaged with the community. And there are some practical things that both also Hannah and also Camila mentioned that are key for all of us. I'm not a refugee, but for French refugees who are working is the visa. And it sounds very basic stuff, but having now the visa lasts only 1.5 years. If you go to a small company, they look at your papers and they say, as an employer, I will have to either hire a new person in a year time, or I have to pay for your visa to become a more permanent one. Unless you're going to work for a big multinational company, very few medium-sized employers are going to hire you. So this question of visa is not a minor issue. We're not talking about we want a charity to say you can stay in the country forever, but give us 5 years. Say, it doesn't count for a permanent resident, but you have 5 years, you can plan for it, you can get a better employment chances. The same for your child. If he is or she is going to uni, it's 3 years, and it's a big question mark. 1.5 years is halfway through. Are you going to be able to stay in the country? Are you going to pay the UK fee? You're going to pay, can you get the student loan? Or you're going to pay international loan that is not affordable to everyone. So it's a lot of coming to this visa, which people really uncertainty. Like if you say it's never going to happen, you have to go back to Ukraine no matter what, be clear about it. But if you think, okay, we don't know what is happening, have 5 years plan about it. These are important parts that really now key to community here. And something that Han also mentioned, like GCSE A levels, if you think about it, it's not only about Ukrainian identity, but also there is a minimum number of GCSE people have to say. You came in the country, you just get your feet around. To get to GCSE pass is very hard because you have to have minimum number. Having Ukrainian GCSE is an easy win for you because it's your language. And it keeps you kind of also related to a national identity is also positive. So the small changes making huge impact. One thing that I also see from the practical point of view, a lot of work is done now by the grassroots small organization of training refugees. And we'll have AHB organized a wonderful event a few days ago about all the community. We have hundreds of these organizations. Why they're important? Because they tailor their work with the people. They tailor their work, how they train them, but also they keep this community of Ukrainians important to leave them related to Ukraine. And important for this funding to continue because a lot of funding come now from the Home Office through the local authorities. question mark later. Everybody knows certain, is funding going to continue? Is it going to be cut now? So to have more visibility for these groups to work also important. So funding process is important. And one thing that I probably mentioned as the last one, that we talked about, this look and see approach that Camila is mentioning. And I think at some stage we have to consider, for example, for the students to have internship programs to go back to Ukraine, that, you know, they come for a period, they have experience, they build their professional network, then they come back to finish study here. But it opens the door for them to actually do come back to Ukraine if they establish their connections. And the same maybe for some corporate placements, you know, you go for a year. If things work, you stay. If not, you come back, but open to make it more flexible. And the kind of last thing I want to raise is more why it is important for us to be engaged in this effort. If you talk to anyone in Ukraine, their number one priority is victory, right? The central government number one priority is to win this war. And it's fantastic for us to think longer term, but they look at it and say, if you don't win the war, there is no Ukraine. So they don't have a kind of mental financial capacity to put too much resources into addressing this issue of reconstruction recovery longer term. So that's why importance of diaspora, of refugee community, of international organization to think about it and kind of prepare the base, what has to be done. And things we mentioned, for example, and again, investments, things that I know from practical point of view, very few companies wants to put money directly today because there is a war. Even later, so you can start kind of connecting conversations now, but you have to think about blended finance capacity. You have to make sure that there is some layering, so some risk sharing with the financial institution like EBRD or you know, more kind of philanthropical funds. You have to think about how to manage the risk of these people to get engaged, because there is huge uncertainty how long this war is going to last, what is going to outcome, and how much actually we need to reconstruct also from territory point of view. We don't know, like now 20% of Ukraine is under Russia. Is it going to stay there? We're going to get it back? Big question. So for us as point of view, I think number one, focus on keeping the current refugees as much visibility for them to get their maximum economic potential. Number two, to also think about the work we can do without relying too much on the Ukrainian central government in this stage and just trying to be proactive. And number three, how you manage risks, because we don't know what shape and how long it's going to take. I just put the quote from Churchill, like he was talking about the same, that, you know, like any government when they're facing the war, this is what they're thinking. They're thinking about today. We have to survive today. Nobody think longer term. And it's not just Ukraine related. The same was in the UK in the Second World War. So it's nothing new about that. And we have to remember about it and don't be too upset when Ukrainian government is not much engaged on a daily basis sometimes. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. That was fascinating. I know there are lots of people with expertise in the audience. So I'm going to open it up for questions now. So please raise your hand. We've got a couple of roving mics. And please let us know who you are and what institution you represent, if you represent one. So you've got a question down here. Ray. Yeah, I think maybe the mics might work as well, yeah.
All right. So hello, everybody. My name is Simon. I'm a student here at LSE. And first of all, thank you very much for today's conference, for the quality of it, for the statistics provided. It's rather refreshing to see an event on Ukraine that actually doesn't just outline the problems, but actually plans some solutions. That is rare to see. Thank you for that. I wanted to focus on the education side of things, as Anna talked about the apprenticeship programs, and Anya talked about the university programs and the A-levels and GCSE. So a lot of immigrants face the issue of transferring degrees. A lot of the times in the West, degrees, whether it's a high school degree for students applying to universities or skilled workers who have to transfer their degrees from university, those degrees are not accepted in the West, especially if they're coming from a non-Western country, in this case, Eastern Europe. And what that results in, and it's kind of evident in USA and in Canada, that immigrants from Ukraine are forced to do manual labor or labor that is not fit to their high skills because their diploma is not recognized. So I wanted to ask if any of you have any expertise on what the situation is in the UK at the moment, whether or not there are any pathways for high-skilled professionals from Ukraine to gain a skilled, high-skilled job, high-paying job here, and whether or not there are some pathways for scholarships for students who might not have the foundings for a foundation program, for example, because as an overseas student, the fees are impossibly high, especially for somebody who has to run away from the country with practically nothing.
Thank you. That's a great question. I think it's probably one for Anya or Anna to come in on. I mean, clearly when something, a great shock happens to one's life in this sense. I haven't personally worked on Ukrainian refugee situation, but I've worked on the refugee situation in the Middle East. You move and you take the first job. But as you both said, this is drawing out now over some time. And so you have a situation with people, as Simon said, who have very advanced degrees, still potentially doing that first job, doing that emergency job. And that's a huge loss of human capital, human potential.
Yeah.
What can be done?
If I go first then, I think from experience of actually speaking to people who've come into, for example, to our welcome centre, there are a number of issues. One, people come in, I remember on our very first day of opening, someone came in, they said, I'm a dentist. Can I work as a dentist here in the UK? Well, you could work as a dentist, but it would cost you £3,000 to change your qualifications and retrain. So there's a lot of financial barriers, even relatively small levels of finance, a few £100s. But one, you have to initially translate your qualification document even, and get a translation. That costs. You then have to go to the organisation that it works out what qualification you've actually got, and then can change that, register what it means in this country. That costs money. All of those things cost money, and sometimes people just say, well, okay, I'm just going to work as a dental hygienist, or we've got a vet that came in who now is a dog groomer, because she can't work as a vet here. So yes, there have been barriers, and I think people have just gone with it because they want to get ahead and have an income. In terms of scholarships, under the Ukraine visa scheme, you can go to university initially here and be a home student for fees. But I know that, for example, Lord Professor Lionel Tarasenko, who is actually president of the new Reuben College at Oxford University, he really put an enormous amount of effort into getting free places, fully funded places at lots of Oxford colleges. But that only happened in the first year. And then after that, he launched, they said, oh, we can't really afford to sponsor any more Ukrainian students. And then after that, he set up a massive fundraising campaign to try to get those scholarships for really talented students to be able to attend Oxford University. And there are a number of different University of Sanctuaries. There's also a scheme of a sort of dual partnership where Ukrainian universities, so universities in Ukraine, are now linked up and have partners that are universities in the UK, and they do different visits. So for example, I have a particular link with the Ukrainian Catholic University, which is a private university in Lviv, and they have been allocated Nottingham University with which to connect. So all of these little partnerships and that sort of thing, I think, will help to increase those linkages, particularly for education.
Thank you.
Just only thing I can add, and thank you for the question, very important, that what I see from the grants and support available to do this transferring of the degrees and translation, it's a bit of funny area because Home Office gave money to local authorities, but every local authority has a discretional right to decide how this money are used. So with one of the councils I work more closely, we have very good relationship with the Home for Ukraine team, and we actually would give grants for the people to do this translation of the certificates. But you go, couple of kilometers or miles away, that council would decide, no, we don't want to finance. So it's a very discretional base, and it would be another policy to have maybe a bit more clarity from the Home Office for each local authority to say, okay, these are also things you have to support and you have to think through. That's very important.
Thank you. Questions from this side of the room, and then I'll come back over here. Don't be scared.
You've done a very good job now, Chris.
Yeah, exactly. Anyone up here?
Maybe we can ask if there are any comments as well.
Yeah, comments as well. I know we've got lots of experts in the room. Anything the panel missed? Sorry, we've also got people online. I shouldn't forget about them. How are the people? Are the people online asking any questions? Great. We'll come to you, sir.
I think.
There was one question and one comment online.
Yep.
One asks, was there any survey conducted on whether Ukrainians currently living in other parts of the world want to return to Ukraine? And then there's a comment by Nicholas online who says, not a question, but I work for the Welsh Refugee Council running Ukraine support project. In Wales, we have a Welsh Asylum and Refugee Doctors Program, which helps medical professionals to get back into practice in the NHS. We need an expansion of such programs and central government funding to facilitate it. And then there's another question from Alec Bradpiece asking, how can we mobilize political support in the UK, given we are in an increasingly fragmented system and we are suffering from our own fiscal challenges?
Okay. Loads of questions online.
Surveys?
Yeah, did you cover that? It changes over time, right?
Yeah, I mean, we have some information about the return intentions, and that's the data that I show that in November 2022, 50% of refugees abroad in different countries, not just in the UK, indicated that they wanted to come back. Definitely, they were coming back once the war ended. And in December 2024, that number was 20%. And in the UK, the number that we have that comes from the ONS survey is that 68% of Ukrainians here wish to remain in the UK. So the numbers that I show are from the other countries, the average of the other countries.
Yeah. I can comment on the second question about how you make people continue support here while UK is facing their own challenges. I think the way of it is, one is to mobilize diaspora here who has the connection to the country. And number two, also what Ricardo was saying, that you have to show it's an interest of UK as well. So if more people are working here, obviously the less benefit the reliance of these people is. So in a sense that in the meantime, while we are solving out that this piece is going to happen or not, the more people work, the more they pay tax. It benefits everyone. So there is the financial benefit actually of supporting this community here.
Yes.
Can I add something?
Of course.
I think the other thing in terms of mobilizing the diaspora, I mean, I remember in the 1990s when Ukraine got independence in 1991, there was a big mobilization then of the old, what they call the old diaspora, the people who are from US, Canada, to a certain extent from the United Kingdom, who had arrived in those places after the Second World War. And they sort of bulldozed in, if you like, into Ukraine, saying, oh, we know everything, we're going to teach you everything. I think we have to be very careful about not teaching grandmother to suck eggs, because there are a lot of very talented people in Ukraine, and obviously there are issues. But I think it does require a balanced approach, that we're not here to teach people what to do. They do know their own, they do know their own mind. And in fact, I had a fantastic example today. Somebody that I met 2 years ago at a conference just before the UK London-based recovery conference, who then went back to Ukraine. She was here as a refugee. She then went back to Ukraine. She said, I really don't want to stay here. I want to go back and help in Ukraine. And she has very much become involved now in an NGO looking at helping homes and houses become more insulated. It's a major thing, is building the infrastructure of new housing. And in fact, at a conference yesterday, first of all, she said it was fantastic. In my speech, I could give the example of housing benefit in the UK, in London. She'd experienced housing benefit and how it worked, and could apply that to the development of social housing and infrastructure in Ukraine. The issue with housing there is that any new housing that's built is still seen as temporary housing. And she was basically putting forward suggestions to ministers about changes in policy, which would make these permanent housing. because if it's still designated as temporary, there's not much then that you can do in terms of improvements. So it's having these step-by-step movements in, drip feeding experience from this country, but also building on what is already in Ukraine. I think that's very important.
That's really interesting. Thank you. I wanted to follow up on, I'm going to come to you, so next. I wanted to follow up on one of the questions that was asked online, which was about Wales. These types of policy are policies which can be made at subnational level, and the UK is a devolved system. So I wanted to ask in general, if you know about different parts of the UK that are doing kind of better or worse. And then specifically on Wales, I think it's come up a few times, the importance of protecting language as a part of protecting identity. And I would say that probably in the UK in general, with English speakers, that's something that people don't think about at all, because English is just the world's default language. But there are countries, Wales being one of them, I would say France is another, where the kind of protection, Italy a little bit less so than France, but yeah, Wales and France definitely, where there are real strong policies for protecting the language. Are Ukrainians finding any more kind of sympathy or help in places like that, where people recognize how important protecting language is?
I just start from the first that obviously after the war happened, this solidarity for Ukrainian culture and language skyrocketed. And it's also, as you know, historically, Ukraine has always been a bit of bilingual because of the USSR and the Russian side. But now you see that even refugees who are coming from the Russian-speaking parts of Ukraine, they're here actually responding, they're trying to speak Ukrainian more. It's more kind of growing. And we see that again, and Ina can confirm that there is more and more recognition that Ukrainian culture is not Russian culture. And we have our own poets and our own kind of, we don't fit in this Soviet Union box. So there's more and more events around in London. I think this is the positive over the last 3 years that, we are not only known that, are we all about this Russian ballet or, like we're really getting our own identity, which is an important step. Right. And I see it's now happening even here from the people who are Exhibition Royal Academy of Arts of Ukrainian 1920s art, which would never happen a few years ago. So there are more and more steps, but it's a slow process that we have to kind of beat. But we do get this impact that now there's a separate recognition of Ukrainian culture and the language, which is important to keep going. From point of view of regional, and maybe Anna can give more, but I know at the beginning, for example, Scotland was much more flexible to the visas support. So the state could sponsor. So in the sense that, that to scheme visa for the Home for Ukraine, you have to be invited by the citizen. And UK obviously a bit making it harder to who can be the sponsor. And used to be family, now not a family. So Scotland was one of the most kind of advanced. And it's changing a bit, but you can say.
Yeah, I think Scotland and Wales developed a super sponsor scheme. So in effect, the government sponsored refugees to come here. I think there was something about 23,000, if I'm trying to pull this out of my brain, that were sponsored under the super sponsor scheme in Scotland, and less, probably about 5,000 maybe in Wales. I might have got those figures wrong, but it's around of that order. There was also a different system in Scotland in that under that super sponsor scheme, families or women with children were given what was called welcome housing. After a while, I think they realised people weren't moving on from the welcome housing as quickly as they thought. So there were a lot of people sitting in those initial, in effect, emergency accommodation. And I think probably everybody's heard the fact that there was a cohort of Scottish refugees who ended up living on a cruise ship. Although I have to say that there were some good stories that came from that cruise ship. People said that they could build a community. They started having their children could communicate with each other. They set up sort of rudimentary Ukrainian schools. So although that hasn't worked in some areas of refugee policy, for example, the boat immigrants who were placed on the boat on the Bibby Stockholm, I think in Scotland it did work quite well. I think partly as well because of the profile of the the people who were there. So I think in terms of language, it's difficult because I've spoken with British volunteers who have been, I have to say, absolutely fantastic in welcoming Ukrainians, developing English language lessons where they volunteer at and so on. But I think I have had comments about, oh, you know, people have been speaking Russian. Others have sort of commented, why are you speaking Russian? We've got to speak Ukrainian. The issue of language is a very complex one in you know, the Ukrainian community. And I think it's something that's much more complex. You can't really talk, you know, discuss it at length because it's very involved. But I think, you know, British people here, British volunteers, have picked up this issue here. So it's something still that's a different conversation.
Okay. A gentleman in the third row has been waiting. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Nathan. I'm actually on the same exec master's course as Anya, but this is just a general question. It's to go back to the point around, the specific point around the cost of translating degrees. And I don't know how much kind of training a dentist, for example, from scratch would cost the UK government, but I'm sure it's probably quite a bit less than the £3,000, £4,000, £5,000 that it would take to translate the degree from the person from Ukraine. So do you think that an argument could start to be made to the UK government that actually the UK government covering the cost is actually, in strategic areas of specific labour shortages, is actually an investment in the NHS, in general engineering, in the UK economy as a whole?
That's a really great question. In the interests of time, I'm going to collect questions and then we'll kind of pick the right experts. So can we just start at the very back and collect them all and work forward? We only have about 10 minutes left, so please be brief with your question.
Hello, I'm Olga Tokaryuk, Chatham House Academy Associate and author of a research paper on Ukrainian refugees and diaspora engagement strategies. And I was wondering, what's your opinion on the whole temporary protection scheme for Ukrainians in the EU, but also here in the UK, and whether this idea of temporary protection that was initially seen as a blessing because it gave Ukrainians immediate access to labor market, to social support schemes, to education, in long term proved to be actually a curse because it also creates enormous uncertainty with the UK and also the European Union not offering many options to Ukrainians, unlike other asylum seekers, for permanent settlement. Thank you.
Thank you, Olga. And then along the row from you.
Thank you very much for the insightful presentation. My name is Igor, and my question concerns something that Ricardo mentioned, which is sort of friendshoring. And the question is, you know, how does Ukraine, after a potential peace settlement, fit into the political economy of the EU? What industries will serve as the basis of this kind of reconstruction drive? And sort of the second question leading out of that is, are there any prospects for industrial reconstruction?
Brilliant. And then there was one a little bit further forward. Thank you. Thanks, Igor.
Hello, good evening. My name is Ina Rohorovich. I'm the Executive Director of Ukrainian Samaris Trust, working with these young people who we hope would return one day. So the question is, following on the temporary status, but working with so many with those 28% of the younger population who are getting assimilated, although under temporary status, being the 4th year here in UK, shouldn't there be a strategy around Ukrainian identity preservation? Because you touched the topic of Ukrainian language development, and there is still in the year 4 no Ukrainian GCSE. The Ukrainian supplementary schools are not being supported by any strategic central support. So nothing is done about Ukrainian identity preservation, but yet we hope these children should go back to Ukraine, integrate into the education system and labor market, but they speak English, and they think of themselves as part of the British society now. Everyone at the age of 10 and younger is in that position.
Great, thank you. And I'll just take one final question from the gentleman next.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you very much for each of you. A great panel, great topic. And in a view of the rebuilding Ukraine, the contribution to economic recovery. In the first place, I would like to have your thoughts. If any of you, and possibly specifically, sorry, I apologize, basically.
I think we can.
I'll try without mic, basically. My question will be probably to you, Ricardo. Are you aware about the plans to introduce the policy of inviting the migrants from the whole wide world to Ukraine in order to help rebuilding? And are you aware about any plans, basically, of Europe? I'm looking about EU in this case. Now we have to send migrants from Europe to Ukraine to help rebuild the Ukrainian economy. I was made aware, basically, of this information from Ukraine that in the next year, in 2026, there will be about 350,000 migrants sent to Ukraine as a working migrants. And until 2030, there will be about 5 million, possibly some sources say 2 million of people who will be sent to Ukraine as a working migrant. Any thoughts on this point? By the way, my name is Michael Kolov. I represent Ukrainian St. Mary's Trust, and also actually my day job, I'm a lawyer at Sterling Lawyers Limited City.
Thank you very much, Michael. Really interesting question. Shall we start with you, Ricardo, if that's okay? So we've got two questions, one from Igor. A few elements to it, friendshoring, the role, the place of Ukraine in the EU, what industries, and then Michael had this question about the need for a labour force then to go into Ukraine to help rebuild it.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks. I mean, these are very important questions, and I think like politically closely linked with the issue of migration, in the sense that the conversation about the enlargement and the prospect of all enlargements of the EU has always been linked with the issue, okay, what are the consequences in terms of migration flows? Now, you might remember the issue of the Polish plumber, like the big challenge with the enlargement to in the 2000s, okay? So that's the issue, that where the issue of the enlargement becomes, or one of the issues that are highly politically sensitive when it comes to the enlargement. So I think demonstrating that the type of migration that can result from the enlargement and the membership of Ukraine to the European Union is a type of migration that can generate opportunities on both sides, is a very important element to facilitate the conversation on the enlargement. The prospect of the enlargement and Ukrainian membership of the European Union is critical to support the reorganization of European supply chains in favor of Ukraine, so of integration, in terms of foreign direct investment, in terms of trade flow. So there are important opportunities there. And that's why we have placed a lot of emphasis in thinking about tools that can support this prospect on how to facilitate a forward-looking and profitable process of enlargement from day one. I don't have like any particular knowledge on this particular policy in terms of like opening borders, but I think this is like it's reflecting the idea of generating opportunities on both sides and allowing like migration flows that can support reconstruction and in the longer run can support economic development in the country. Of course, very much depends on the timing and what the post-war would look like when it will finally come.
I think
on the industrialization.
If very briefly, if you would, yeah.
Yeah, just in terms of the question on industry and so on. Agri-business is extremely big in Ukraine, so agriculture is very important. One of the key issues in Ukraine at the moment with agriculture is demining. There are millions of hectares that have been mined in Ukraine, and that actually has affected the worldwide supply of grain. So I think more than 5% of the world's supply of grain has been, that area has been affected by by mines. So there are lots of issues in terms of investment that are affected by the war. It's not just a matter of coming in and saying, right, we're going to start our big agri businesses again. You know, demining is going to take 20 years at the minimum. And I have spoken to investors here, people who've, you know, have factories in Ukraine, clothes. In fact, the coat I've got today is manufactured in Ukraine. Others are saying, you know, they're my farmers there are trying to struggle with you know, the aspects of war. So there is a lot of, I think, interest in investment, a British investment in Ukraine. You know, I've spoken to businesses who want to invest, but the other issue is the environment in Ukraine for business. They found it very difficult to get through all the rules and regulations. You know, corruption to a certain extent. I know one of the directors at TUI who tried to start up various travel businesses there and just ended up withdrawing because he said it was just too difficult. So there are other barriers that have been there previously, but also additional barriers that have been developed due to the wartime situation.
That's really, really interesting. Thank you. Nathan, I'll take your one just because I want to give Anya and Anna the last word with these questions about young people, which I think is probably the most important and powerful thing. On degrees, what I would urge you to look at, and it relates to Simon's point, first question, compulsory licensing. So this is something, for example, I used to write for The Economist magazine. We used to talk about it the whole time. If you're a dentist, if you've got a foreign trained dentist, clearly you want that person to go through some checks and balances because they're going to be, you know, potentially operating on you. But the incentives of the people who have those qualifications aren't always to give other people those qualifications, right? So these costs, these £3,000, £5,000 in all different things, including law, including architecture, all sorts of different areas of the economy, it's dressed up as sometimes a quality thing, which we would all agree with, but part of it is a competition thing. It's about keeping people out. So I'm completely with you. If you've got somebody with those skills, it's going to be fiscally sensible. The UK is in a fiscally bad position to just get that person to be an active member of the labour force with their top level skill that they have. But sometimes the legal problem is that the UK government faces that there's some oversight body that it can't do that. Let's finish though on this question of Ukrainian young people with two questions sort of related, and I'll let you guys answer them as you see fit. So Olga had the question about the temporary retention scheme. It was a blessing, but over time it's become a curse. And Irina had this question about young people, essentially the package that is needed for Ukrainian young people outside of Ukraine. Yeah. Are you? Sorry, yeah. Ricardo must go. He's got somewhere to be at 8. Thank you, Ricardo. Yeah.
Just very briefly, I think that for the temporal schemes, and Olga would know that I think what we're all pushing to have the longevity, right? So now I think we learned that no one knows the timing of the war. And that's the problem that people dealt with all the crises at home, with their husband being back at war, trying to build a new life, but also you cannot know if you're going to stay here for a year, for 2 years, for whatever period. So to give certainty as a lesson for all of us, give a longer period of time so people can plan their lives. So that's the only lesson I can see of this. And, you know, there is, obviously everybody was optimistic. As this war started, it was a question of months, but you know, 4 years past and we're still facing the same. So this is number one. For the national debt is a question of funding, right? So Ukrainian government, again, unfortunately, all the money available are going to different causes. So, and it's a harder one because it's hard to justify economically doing this work. But I think as we've shown that, again, this national debt is the part of people to be able to return back home. And again, it has to be probably a combination of some state governments funding plus diaspora fundraising, but that's the way forward. It's kind of a blended, again, finance approach, but it has to be funded better. That's definitely our problem.
Thank you. And any last thoughts on that, Anna?
No, I mean, I think on the temporary protection, I think it really shows that governments thought Ukraine was just going to give up. and say, okay, we surrender, and it's going to be a few weeks, and then something will happen. And I think that has surprised everybody, maybe apart from Ukrainians, that Ukraine has shown the resilience that it has in terms of still continuing the fight for victory. We are, as an association, pressing all the time. We do have regular meetings with the Home Office and other organisations as well, are all pressing for this policy to extend protection and also for leave to remain, if that's appropriate. I think Home Office, off the record, have said things like, one, they have banned the use of the word return in any kind of documents that they have. So I think there are not going to be any forced repatriations at a minimum. And I think, they are currently looking at different examples of European policy and so on. They're looking at the policy and trying to build that. So they are working on the next steps, really. But, hopefully that will be resolved. There has been a further increase of 24 months, but it's very piecemeal. This is the issue. It's bit by bit, and that's not ideal.
Thank you very much. Well, look, this is clearly a hugely important topic and an evolving one. Please do stay in touch with us. Again, you can find the report, and with Anya's agreement, hopefully we could put your slides up as well. If you just get to the LSE website, lse.ac.uk/growth, just the word growth, and then that will take you to our site. So please do stay in touch that way. Also, you can stay in touch by following our Substack, which you can find from the QR codes on the book tokens that have been given out. Evening events are always really good at LSE, but this was a particularly good one, I think, not because of my chairing, but because of the panel, who were fantastic. I've learned a huge amount, and it's made me want to actually do even more work on this topic. So thank you very much, Camila. Thank you, Anya. Thank you, Ricardo, in absentia. I know where he's got to go. He is going to an important meeting. And thank you, Anna. Thank you so much.